I'm sorry, 7 p.m. I don't know where I am. All righty. So let's see. And we're recording. Okay, I see the button now. So this evening, thank you for coming to our speaker series program. Few announcements, upcoming events on September 10th. First, I want to say Jane is with us, but her computer is not showing her face. She can't access the camera. So I have volunteered to do the presentation. So the first event that we have coming up, September 10th, please join us for a lecture with Dominic Biagini, who is a San Diego-based wildlife filmmaker, drone pilot, naturalist with passion for the marine life, and the founder and captain of Gone Whale Watching. He's going to be presenting San Diego's changing cetacean landscape, observations from the whale watch community, and that will be on the Legacy. And then we'll start showing up about 6:30, and then the presentation starts at 7 and will be Zoom and on the Legacy. September 13th, please join us for a social ACS whale watch on board the Legacy on their 10 a.m. trip. And to book your trip, you can go to sdwhale.com, and there is a discount for ACS members. And if you want to leave your address in the chat, we can send you details for signing up for the trip. There's a discount for the members, like I said, and if you're not a member, then we encourage you to join ACS and join the pod and take advantage of the discount, and which basically almost pays for your membership. And then by being a member, you're not just supporting one of the world's first whale conservation organizations. You're a part of a dynamic community of marine scientists, conservationists, and ocean lovers who are actively protecting cetaceans through education, advocacy, and action. And you can join ACS by going to acsonline.org/membership. And then on September 20th, we have the San Diego Whale Watch Beach Cleanup, and that will be at 9 a.m. at Fiesta Island. On October 4th, the San Diego chapter of ACS will be tabling an event at the Walter Monk Day in La Jolla. So if you're in the area, please come by and say hello. Jennifer is going to be putting information in the chat about volunteering for the San Diego Whale Watch Beach Cleanup and for volunteering for Monk Day. It is a lot of fun. They do have a lot of vendors out there and a lot of information. And then you can see our very own member, Carl. You can see his, Carl Glowinky, his, I think it's all bronze statues, and there's a JJ the Gray Whale sculpture that he made, and then a map of the La Jolla shores that is all there as part of the setup in its Kellogg Park in La Jolla. We are building a new website, and anyone who is interested in helping us, please leave your name and email address in the chat. We're looking for people that can contribute just to the ideas about the design, content, and then just any other tidbits of information or suggestions or actions that you want to take to help make our website better. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Over the past 8 years, our speaker has overseen and advised on research projects examining humpback whales, gray whales, bottlenose dolphins, and harbor porpoises in San Francisco Bay and the surrounding water, which has expanded our understanding of cetacean behavior in this area. After receiving his BA from UC Santa Cruz in Environmental Studies, his MS from UC Davis in Animal Science, and his Ph.D. from Texas A&M University in Wildlife and Fishery Sciences, he went on to serve as principal investigator or project manager for marine mammal research projects, research director for Golden Gate Cetacean Research, and subsequently as a research coordinator and advisor for the Cetacean Conservation Biology Program at the Marine Mammal Center. He also holds a lecturer position at the University of California, Berkeley, where he teaches in the departments of integrative biology and environmental science, policy, and management. He supports and advises graduate students studying marine mammals in the US and New Zealand, with studies ranging from sleep apnea in elephants to the distribution movements and ecology of bottlenose dolphins in the Marlborough Sound to seasonal foraging behavior of humpback and gray whales. Our speaker brings us a wide and amazing background. Please help me welcome Dr. Tim Markowitz as he presents San Francisco Bay Area Cetaceans, returning residents, migrants, and immigrants.
Thank you. That was a lot. That was a
Yes.
mouthful. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see you all, and thanks for coming back again
Yes.
after our technical difficulties with Zoom. Hopefully, I have been having some internet in and outs here at the house, so knock wood, we'll get through today's lecture just fine. Yeah, I'm here to talk to you about work we've been doing with cetaceans in the San Francisco Bay Area over the past 8 to 10 years or so. I actually grew up here in the Bay Area, longtime Giants, 49ers, and Warriors fan. Back to the time before any of them had won any championships in the modern era. Um, one of the things that I was kind of amazed by, because I grew up here, went to school down the road at Santa Cruz, and then did my master's at Davis, and then went to do my Ph.D. and subsequently worked for years in New Zealand and also in Alaska. And then I circled back about 10 years ago to the place I'm from. I'm sort of a returning resident to the Bay Area myself. And coming back, I was amazed to see we have cetaceans daily, every day inside San Francisco Bay. So when I grew up here, there were never cetaceans in San Francisco Bay. Very, very occasionally, we would get a wandering humpback whale or gray whale just kind of nose into the bay, and people typically thought they were lost. Now, we have some cetaceans here seasonally, others here year-round. These animals are lucky. Nobody is going to check their passports or their papers. There are no ICE agents that are going to come knocking at their door. They, in a sense, have this ultimate freedom of living at sea. And really, I think, for most of us, when we watch whales and dolphins at sea, one of the things that we marvel at is their sense of freedom. Being mammals, they are warm-blooded, they have large brains, and they are kind of like super predators in the marine environment. So this can make their lives seem relatively carefree, right? Living without borders in a marine environment, when food becomes scarce, moving to other places to find food, etc. But they also have challenges. And in today's talk, I'm going to talk about some of those challenges, and also, of course, how their lives are changing with the changing times. And by the way, I do teach at Cal, and so there will be a pop quiz after this about which animals are the returning residents, which are the immigrants, which are the migrants, and which are perhaps the climate refugees. All right, let's launch in. Maybe. First technical difficulty. There we go. All right. First thing I want to emphasize is that this is not a research effort by any means I engaged in alone. It was a group effort. It's a team effort that I'm reporting on. This is actually not our entire team. This is just some of the key players that were involved in supporting this work and collecting the data over the past 8 to 10 years. They include directors of the Cetacean Conservation Biology Program, Dominic Travis, Kathy George, and Julia O'Hearn at the Marine Mammal Center. Research associates, Bill Keener, who you can see with his binoculars there, and Mark Weber just below him. And graduate students we've worked with, and they include Allison Payne, Becca Lane, and Josie Slatow. So we will, as I go along, I'll try to point out the contributions that various folks have made to this research. So San Francisco Bay is, in a sense, both new and old habitat for cetaceans. The cetaceans that we find in San Francisco Bay and in the immediate water surrounding most commonly are 4 species, each in a different family, each with their own life histories, different stories, and this one thing in common. So the first one we'll talk about is the little harbor porpoise. The harbor porpoise is our returning resident to San Francisco Bay. They were found in San Francisco Bay, at least in some numbers up until World War II, and then were absent until the past decade or so. Our new immigrants to the area are coastal California bottlenose dolphins. And in fact, many of these same individual bottlenose dolphins, from the shores of San Diego. That's right, we have identified these individuals and tracked them, working with other researchers, including R.H. DeFran and Dave Weller down there in San Diego, to monitor their expansion of range up into our area over the last 40 years. Then we have gray whales. Now, gray whales, we're going to talk about a little bit. We're going to investigate the possibility that maybe we might class these as climate refugees. They certainly are migrants that come through our area seasonally, normally every year, as they go between their breeding grounds in Baja and their feeding grounds up in the Arctic. But what's happened in recent years is large numbers of them are staying right here and feeding through the feeding season here rather than going north. And then our migrants, the humpback whales, and the humpback whales that we observe here come from breeding grounds in Mexico and Central America. And they come right up along our coastline. Of course, again, past you all down there in San Diego, up to our waters here to feed primarily in San Francisco Bay, the Gulf of the Farallones, and also Monterey Bay and surrounding areas. All right, so for the pop quiz, if you all are taking notes, this is clearly labeled here. And perhaps the last one I should put a question mark by, but we're going to talk today about the little harbor porpoises who are returning residents after many years of absence in San Francisco Bay. Our newcomers, our NorCal newcomers, the coastal California bottlenose dolphins. Those are immigrants to our area. Our regular seasonal migrants who have also made a comeback, the humpback whales, and then these gray whales, also migrants, but many of them seem to be sticking around in San Francisco Bay, the surrounding coastlines, out to the Farallon Islands, rather than making the rest of their trip up north during the feeding season. So let's start with our returning residents. We know harbor porpoises were found once upon a time in San Francisco Bay. How do we know it? Well, some of the evidence comes from the Emeryville Shell Mound, which was excavated and contains, it's old Indian middens, and contains many shells and bones and things. And among the things found there by researchers, including researchers from UC Berkeley, were bones of harbor porpoises. Now, you won't find the shell mound there anymore. If you take the Ashby Avenue Shellmound Street exit, you will find an IKEA store where that shell mound once was. But we have the evidence that was carefully cataloged from that. So, what sort of drove them out? Well, San Francisco Bay, of course, has a long history of mixed uses going back to the times of the gold rush. But particularly as you move into the modern era, you had the construction of major bridges and Treasure Island here, this expansion of space as well as infilling of the bay. Now we know as late as the end of the 1930s, 1939, We have, again, a record. This is from the UC Berkeley Museum of Vertebrate Zoology, a beautifully drawn, hand-drawn image of a harbor porpoise collected at Point Richmond. So we know that they were still here in the late 1930s. But then what happened? So what happened next, of course, was World War II. And during World War II, a submarine net was stretched across the Narrows at the Golden Gate to prevent any submarines or torpedoes or anything else from getting through. This also included cetaceans. In fact, at the time, there was a whale that became entangled in the net and was noted. But this appears to have been the end of harbor porpoises or any other cetaceans in the bay for a long, long time. So our team was fortunate enough to be out there on the shores of the bay and notice this return of the harbor porpoise to our waters. So harbor porpoises re-entered, reoccupied San Francisco Bay. Starting in 2008 was the very first sighting of them. And that's after an absence of more than 60 years. Obviously, the submarine net across the Narrows is gone, but also the bay has become cleaner and seems to support a lot of fish life and other life that they could be utilizing. Now, what we found was, harbor porpoises, if you know anything about harbor porpoise research, they are notoriously shy. So a lot of the previous work done with harbor porpoises involved passive acoustics. They're very hard to approach at sea by boats. And so for that reason, they have been kind of hard to really monitor to study their behavior. But what we discovered is if we walked out on the Golden Gate Bridge and looked down, you could very often see harbor porpoises. Particularly, they seem to come in around the high tide, come in with the tide. And that high tide sort of pushes the currents up against a little submarine mount there called Cavallo Spire. And it causes a lot of whirlpools and eddies. And the fish seem to gather at that location. And where there's fish, there's harbor porpoises that want to eat them. So here we could see some counts. This is over a 5-year period from 2011 to 2015. And you can see we typically saw them around the high tide. This was actually reported in a Stern et al. Paper from 2017 in this sort of first return of the porpoises. And by the way, another important leader in all this research I'm going to talk about here, I mentioned him before, is Bill Keener. You can see him up there on the bridge with that big telephoto lens, peeking in literally to the living room and in some cases the bedroom, as it were, of these harbor porpoises. So we're able to do some photo ID work with them. The longest time span between sightings is 5 years, which is pretty long for this species because they are relatively short-lived. They're also not terribly well marked if you compare them to other small cetaceans, especially something like bottlenose dolphins. But we were able to do some photo ID. We're also able to look at some foraging patterns. So here we can see a harbor porpoise chasing a fish, and also this pelican is quite interested. And we saw a lot of this harbor porpoises swimming on their sides in order to chase fish along the surface of the water. In terms of reproduction, the life of a female harbor porpoise is a busy and challenging one. She basically spends her entire adult life pregnant and or nursing. So they really, really are super moms. Calves are born in summer, and they tend to have calves every other year. And we did see lots of mothers with calves. Now, when you see mothers with calves, obviously something else must be happening involving the males for that to happen. And I mentioned we had sort of an intimate view into their bedroom. And this was one of the first photographs, again, taken by Bill Keener, where we said, wait a minute, what is going on? And here's one leaping animal, and here's another leaping animal. Let's take a closer look. So this is the American Cetacean Society. I don't have to tell you, harbor porpoises don't have legs, right? You all know that. So, there's the arm, and there's another rather long appendage. Um, so we realized with some of this early work that we were actually seeing mating behavior. We were seeing reproductive behavior. Um, and so let's talk a little bit about harbor porpoise reproduction and what's known and some of the things we learned about them. So they have a relatively short lifespan. They live 10 to 12 years. They are synchronized seasonal breeders. There's some sex dimorphism, but it's actually the females that are slightly larger than the males, probably owing to the fact that they give birth to relatively large calves. We see also seasonal enlargement of the testes. And indeed megatestes, some of the largest testes on Earth for their body size. Relatively large penis for a small odontocetes, promiscuity, and probable sperm competition. So when we were watching their behavior, we noticed something kind of curious. So we noticed that they tend to breed in this way where the female will be here swimming along, and the male comes up alongside her and kind of leaps and thrusts into her. So you can sort of see that happening here. But what we notice very quickly, and you can see it again here, is they always did it from the left-hand side. And so this shows you the position of the male relative to the female, sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right, sometimes underneath, sometimes behind, at the initiation of the copulation event. But as he approached her, 100% of the time, it was from the left-hand side. Now, we're scientists. We rarely see anything 100% of the time. Like statistically, we go, wow, 100% of the time, what test do I run? It's just 100%, right? I don't need to tell you it's statistically significant. We did publish this in a paper by Keener et al. In Aquatic Mammals. My vote initially was to name this paper San Francisco Leftists. But in fact, it was a good thing that I didn't, because subsequent research showed it's not just on the left-hand side in San Francisco, it's in the left-hand side everywhere. Here's actually a very distinctive individual. This female, we called her scoliosis, I think for obvious reasons. She has a spinal deformity. Having said that, we saw a mating event with her in May of 2012. And the following year, we saw her with a calf. So she seems to be getting around okay and having babies. So we started to compare notes, as I mentioned, with other researchers, right? Is this just a San Francisco thing? And the answer is no, it's not. Now, I mentioned that these animals are notoriously shy and very hard to approach in the wild. But one of the new advances, of course, has been with drone technology. And so in a lot of cases now with drones, or also people with long range lenses taking images from shore and from a distance, we're able to compare notes. And once everyone knew what they were looking for, they're looking for one animal approaching another and leaping. And we went through all that photographic and video evidence with them. Sure enough, we found that the sexual behavior was always, when it could be determined, associated with this aerial kind of leaping into and thrusting. And it was always lateralized to the left-hand side. Everywhere, all over the world. In Alaska, in Washington, in England, in Scotland, in the Netherlands, in Sweden. Aerial on the left-hand side, the same behavior. Subsequently, we did some work with Dara Orbach and colleagues looking at, they looked at postmortem female specimens and at the reproductive tract of those specimens. And you can see here, this appears to be one of those very, very rare cases of co-evolved lock and key male and female genitalia. Very, very rare, right? We see it in some birds and some insects. Extremely unusual among mammals. So if you want to read more about the sex lives of harbor porpoises and other porpoises, check out this book. This is a free ebook. You can just Google it, Sex and Cetaceans, and download it for free at home. I also have a chapter I wrote with my wife and Dara Orbach and Bernd Bursig on the sex lives of dusky and spinner dolphins, but that's not in the talk today. But anyway, that's also in the book and a lot of other great sex stuff. So I know there's a lot of cetacean enthusiasts here. How many of you knew there's a book all about the sex lives of cetaceans? Did you know? Did you know? And it's free and anyone can download it. Go check it out. Okay, that's my plug. All right, I won't even charge you a penny. You don't have to tell them I sent you when you download your free copy. All right. So that was the first group, the harbor porpoises. I can tell I'm going to have to speed up. So here we go. Get ready to speed up. Here's a look at our coastal California bottlenose dolphins. Now, I'm not actually showing you the whole coastline here, but if you go back to the 1980s, the dolphins that we have subsequently seen up in our waters were all down in the SoCal Bight. They were all somewhere between typically south of Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, down to San Diego, and also to Baja, okay, in the 1980s. In the 1990s, they started to move up, and you could see here that they really moved up in association with a large El Nino event. And I should emphasize, this was not all the coastal California bottlenose dolphins. It was some of them. Some of them moved up the coast, and through much of the 1990s, you could see them mainly in and around Monterey Bay. That's what you see here in this picture. In the early 2000s, we started to have our first sightings along the coastline and on into San Francisco Bay. And then by the 2010s, you can see we have them all along up into San Francisco Bay, beyond San Francisco Bay, and on up into Sonoma and Mendocino counties. So if we look at dolphins that we have photographed in and around San Francisco Bay at this point, it's about 101 identified adult animals, and that is about 20% of the total estimated stock of coastal California bottlenose dolphins. Here's our sort of cumulative discovery curve. You can see actually we extend this up a little bit here over time. A lot of them pass through. Some stay for a time, some come and go. You can ask the question, are they resident here, these immigrants? Or are they just kind of passing through, moving through the area? Well, they are moving all around. We've had some go all the way out to the Farallon Islands, which is a new offshore record for this group of dolphins. And we've had some go quite a long ways north, and we routinely have many go between San Francisco Bay and Monterey Bay and adjacent coastal regions like Half Moon Bay, Pacifica, and those areas. So this is that kind of look at their northward range expansion. Now you can see your region down there in SoCal. Here's where they mostly were in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s. This you could read more about this in the Keener et al. Paper on the northward range expansion of bottlenose dolphins. But that's just kind of showing you their move over that 40-year period. And again, this is for photo identified individual dolphins that we are tracking. Okay, so this is not just based on hey, I saw a dolphin, but actually we got a photograph of that dolphin and matched it to previous photographic records. And so, of course, because of this, we can look at different individual histories. And so here's some examples of case studies. And what I want to mention in this is we actually have a new long distance record, right? So here we have the case of Miss and some of her companions Star of their lives. That's where you guys are. 1985, she was in San Diego, down there close to the Mexican border, to 2017. She was all the way up here in Puget Sound. Look at that environment. Does that look like San Diego? Does that look like the place she was born? She is immigrating to new country, right? Pine trees and everything else. Um, so we saw, that some back and forth in this move north. We saw others go back and forth again. So sort of different patterns. Some going all the way back down to Baja, coming up to Monterey Bay, back to Baja, and then back up to San Francisco Bay afterwards. So there's a lot of movement along the shoreline. I might add, because there's so much movement along the shoreline, this research effort has really been aided by a lot of members of the public and citizen scientists we work with. They do come quite close to shore. And that means if you have a long lens, you might get a photograph of a dolphin that we can identify. And so we have a lot of people send us pictures that they've taken from along the coastline that we can then match up. Now, some dolphins have stuck around within San Francisco Bay and or the surrounding regions and shown sort of a little bit less movement. One of those is a dolphin named Kaimi. Now, Kaimi became quite popular with the local kayaking club in Alameda. So this is the little island of Alameda near Oakland. And you could see her there. So Alameda, the island is just off to her right, and in front of her there, that's the Bay Bridge. So she remained in this relatively small area for at least 3 years, and in many respects, she acted somewhat. She was often solitary, sometimes seen with her mother Ark, but in many cases, her primary social companions seemed to be people out in their kayaks and things like that. So she seemed to show some of the characteristics of what we sometimes call lone sociable dolphins that kind of adopt people for a time. And this happens at different places around the world, particularly with bottlenose dolphins. Now, later on, she was seen outside the bay and she had a calf and she had rejoined a larger group of dolphins. So she's, last I checked, not returned. She's not in the immediate vicinity of Alameda anymore, but she was there for a few years. Another thing we've seen, these creatures are moving north, right? There's pine trees, and guess what? There's salmon. There's salmon runs. So this is new food, right? How many salmon do you see bottlenose dolphins eating in San Diego? Not a lot, right? Because there's not a lot of salmon in San Diego or Los Angeles. So new prey opportunities, new feeding. We also know they are breeding and having babies up here. So these are calves with fetal folds. Now, I feel like I'm probably speaking to an audience that knows what fetal folds are. Do you all know what fetal folds are already? So because calves are born relatively large relative to the size of the mother, they're sort of accordioned up inside mother before they emerge. And when they pop out, they show these fetal folds, usually for a period of a couple weeks, something like that. So whenever you see these, you know that it's a neonate, it's a newborn calf. And here's a couple that we've seen right in and around San Francisco Bay. Another kind of interaction that we saw that was new, in addition to feeding on salmon, is interactions with those returning residents, the harbor porpoises. Unfortunately for the porpoises, this may not be the best thing. There's actually the #1 cause of death for harbor porpoises brought into necropsy these days by the Marine Mammal Center or our partners at Cal Academy of Sciences is bottlenose dolphins due to this type of aggressive, often fatal interaction that's been termed porpoicide. You may already know there are some different ideas about why this occurs, but it does seem to have something to do with reproductive behavior. It is primarily young up-and-coming males that engage in the behavior. And it's been suggested anyway that it might be linked to the tendency toward infanticide, which also occurs in bottlenose dolphins, kind of similar to lions, where when lions take over, new male lions take over a pride, they kill the cubs to bring the females back into estrus. That's just speculation. Harbor porpoises are about the size of bottlenose dolphin calves, so there could be something to it. And again, we've identified certain individuals that engage in this porpoicidal behavior, and it always seems to be the sort of young, up and coming males. All right, that's our returning residents and our immigrants. Next, let's talk about migrants, the humpback whales. So humpback whales in our region, their summer feeding grounds include San Francisco Bay, the Gulf of the Farallones, and Monterey Bay, and surrounding waters, really. And our photo ID research, and collectively working with a lot of others as well, has shown that their associated winter breeding grounds are Central America and Mexico. And so these two DPSs, as they're called, are listed under the Endangered Species Act. So the Central American breeders are endangered, the Mexican breeders are threatened. Point is, these are not your Maui Wowie humpback whales, right? That breed in Hawaii and feed up in Alaska. Okay. Humpback whales worldwide have really recovered greatly since the whaling days. Um, and many of the stocks are no longer listed as endangered or threatened. These are recovering, the whales along our coastline, but they have been slower to recover. So they're all recovering from whaling. In case you didn't know it, the last active whaling station in the United States was right here in San Francisco Bay, at Richmond in the East Bay, and it closed in 1971. And here you can see a humpback whale being brought in at that whaling station. At that point, whales were mostly used for pet food. At that point, happy to say we found new sources of pet food these days, and the whales have really been recovering. Um, Now, whales occasionally would wander into and out of the bay. In past years, there were some whales called wrong way whales. They're lost. What are they doing in San Francisco Bay? And it made a big news splash. Humphrey was one such. Um, but it wasn't until 2016 that we saw humpback whales entering San Francisco Bay and feeding actively inside San Francisco Bay. And this, of course, brings them into a heavily trafficked urban environment, lots of vessel traffic right in the areas where they're feeding. Humpback whales are rorquals. They are lunge feeders. They have expandable throat pleats. They are very fast swimming, and they routinely eat nekton as well as plankton. So they'll eat small fishes. And here in San Francisco Bay and surrounding waters, we see them eating a lot of anchovies. They're often easily seen at the surface, but they can also spend time foraging and feeding at depth, and they're harder to see when they're submerged. So if we look at when we see humpback whales in San Francisco Bay, it is primarily during that summer feeding season. Again, in the winter, they're going to be down in the breeding grounds. This is sort of different, some different years data, but basically the kind of peak season for humpback whales tends to be in May, June, July. Now, where we see them, just to orient you, so here in the middle of this distribution, that is the Narrows at the Golden Gate Strait. So that is the Golden Gate Bridge. If you can see I don't know if you all can see my cursor, but I'm sort of pointing at it. Can you see my cursor? Yes. Okay. And so we see a lot of them just outside the Golden Gate Bridge, which in an area which we call the Golden Gate Strait. And then we see quite a few of them in what we call the Middle Bay, the sort of deeper waters between the Golden Gate Bridge, Angel Island, and Treasure Island. So how many whales are there? And which ones are they? And how are, who's coming and going? Well, once again, we use photo ID and compared with catalogs collected by many researchers along the coast and largely organized by Cascadia Research to look at the identity of these whales and their movements from day to day and just how many we're seeing. Some of the things we found a typical sort of daily movement with the tide. So at flood and high tide, we tended to find them very close, clustered quite close to the narrows. And at ebb and lower tides, they tended to be further out. Now this, I need to emphasize, is only a portion of all the humpback whales you would find in the Bay Area. Many, many of them are found out to the Fairline Islands, and that's not included in these pictures. So this is just showing you again, just kind of look at if this is the Golden Gate Bridge here, where they're found relative to the tide. And again, they tend to be found around the narrows, particularly at around the high tide. So if you want to go out, see some humpback whales in San Francisco in the summer without taking a boat ride, you can walk across, again, the Golden Gate Bridge and look down at high tide, and you have a pretty good chance of seeing them. I once actually took a class, my marine mammal class from UC Berkeley, out walking on the Golden Gate Bridge, and we hit it really lucky that day. We looked down and we saw, I kid you not, 6 lunge feeding humpback whales beneath our feet. It was pretty awesome to see that much feeding activity in such a small area. Here's an example. So this is a Golden Gate Bridge above. There's a lunge feeding humpback whale below. And as we'll talk about in a minute, that narrow space gets a lot of boat traffic coming and going under that bridge as well. So that's something those whales have to deal with. Here we can see they tend to feed, especially near shore in deeper waters. So deep waters found near shore seem to be their preferred feeding grounds. And this is just showing you their foraging, again, by tidal state. And we see a lot of foraging right there at the narrows. To get a little bit more information, we worked with Cascadia Research Collective, and they did some tagging of some whales. So I'm just going to kind of show you that tagging process. Here's a photo of it. Here is the tag that's deployed with suction cups. It senses time, depth, temperature, position, and kinematics. So it can look at the movements of the animals and be used to estimate foraging lunges at depth. And here is some video, and you can see they're about to tag it, and there it goes. As easy as that. Well, they made it look easy anyway. All right. And here's some information we got back from those deployments. So here's some movements of three individual whales tagged. Actually, I'm going to call your attention to, so you can see the red dotted line there is the Golden Gate Bridge. The dashed lines are actually showing you the shipping lanes. So there's quite a bit of overlap with where the more intense shipping traffic goes. And then I want to show you here, you could see these two individuals, the one in orange and blue, overlap spatially quite a bit. Well, they actually also overlapped temporally. And if we look at their dives during that period of time, they were diving to the same depths and they were foraging at depth. So here we can see feeding lunges 30 meters down. So a lot of times we'll see foraging lunges at the surface. They're obvious. We can see that we can photograph them. They're feeding, as I was kind of showing you before. But they're also feeding at depth when we can't necessarily see them. One of the things I wanted to sort of point out to you here is if we look at the depths, their time at depth, one of the things we can see is they spend a significant portion of time in relatively shallow water, right? In water less than 15 meters deep. Why would we be concerned about this? Well, because they're underwater foraging, they're going to be harder for people to see. And because they're at less than 15 meters depth, they're at a depth where they can still be struck and killed by passing ships. So we have this potential, well, reality really, of vessel interaction for humpback whales in San Francisco Bay. Um, the most likely time for vessel interactions is in summer when they're here, especially we see in the Golden Gate Strait and Narrows, but also further into the bay and in other areas. I've had people ask me before, gee, are the ships damaged when they hit the whales? And for that reason, I offer this photograph. The reality is whales can be struck and killed by vessels, and the skippers of those vessels may not even realize that they hit a whale. In fact, there was a recent case of that. A whale that was struck and killed was witnessed under the Bay Bridge. When they talked to the skipper said, I didn't see any whale. I didn't feel any whale. I didn't hit any whale. And I believe him. He didn't see the whale. But he did strike and kill that whale. So, this is a potential problem. So we see some whales with propeller scars, indications of an interaction with vessels that they survived. And then others that are killed. And so here's an example. This is the humpback whale Fran, very much beloved within the Happy Whale network. She had many fans along our coastline. There were 281 confirmed sightings of her before her death in August of 2022. She was struck and killed by a vessel in the San Francisco Bay Area. So when we look at ship strike deaths in our area, between 2017 and 2023, we can see actually many gray whales, and we're going to talk about why that's a particular problem for gray whales in the next part, but also humpbacks, fin whales, and blue whales. And these are just confirmed from necropsies of animals that have washed ashore. And so when we look at whale ship overlap, we can see sort of this area of greatest concern in terms of risk evaluation. And a wonderful master's student, Becca Lane, I had the opportunity to work with, did her master's work on the first risk analysis for ship strike risk in the San Francisco Bay Area. And she looked at different vessel types. And one of the things you see here is that there's no one size fits all strategy for vessel strike mitigation. Different vessels use different areas in the bay and pose different sorts of risks. Overall, you could see that cargo and high-speed ferries had the highest maximum risk, whereas tug and tow and pleasure craft had the lowest maximum risk. But it's worth noting that all vessels had relatively high risks according to her model. So these animals are living and feeding a lot of times in risky areas. What can we do about it? Well, one of the things that's been done is to adjust the shipping lanes, to draw more distinct boundaries for which vessels need to navigate coming into San Francisco Bay. Another important protection measure that we've been working on is, and this is obviously with the National Marine Sanctuaries, is to expand their borders. So we had this area off Pacifica, just to the south of San Francisco, and on into San Francisco Bay. There was an exclusion zone for a long time, owing to the fact that they had sewage that outfalls that didn't meet the regulations at the time that the sanctuaries were set up. This sort of donut hole lacks the same, some of the at least voluntary measures to reduce ship speed. And so we've been working with folks to kind of get that speed moving down. And just to show you, here's cetacean activity within the exclusion zone. We could see a lot of humpback whale sightings, gray whale sightings, harbor porpoises, etc. Another important protection measure is to reduce vessel speed. And this is showing for San Francisco, Monterey, and Santa Barbara between 2023 and up through June of 2024. San Francisco, we've actually seen an improvement in cooperation rates locally. We've really worked with lots of folks at the Marine Mammal Center. Kathy George especially has worked really tirelessly with a number of groups, including Whale Safe, and also our local Harbor Safety Committee, also NOAA Fisheries and the National Marine Sanctuaries, to try to work with folks to educate folks to get those speeds down ideally to 10 knots or less. That dramatically decreases the mortality risk for these animals. Another thing we've been part of is part of that whale safe program is a real-time acoustic monitor. And you can see this is from the Benioff Ocean Initiative. It's out there monitoring when whales come through the area. This is offshore a little bit more out into heading out towards the Farallones, but gives us at least a broad detection radius. And so a little quick shout out here to the Benioff Ocean Initiative and the Whale Safe program for their efforts to sort of build more collaborative information for everyone to be able to use to know about whale activity in our area. In addition to ship strike risk, entanglement is also an issue in our area. This one's not a humpback whale. This is actually a gray whale that became entangled. The Marine Mammal Center does have a whale disentanglement team, and works closely with NOAA Fisheries in that effort. Here we can see a crab pot rope wrapped around a humpback whale, as you might see it above the water. And you might think, well, it's just one little line. But if you look at it below the water, more often than not, it's going to look something like this. And so it's can be a major source of morbidity and mortality for these animals. And lots of efforts are underway. Some of it includes changing the crabbing season in California, as well as also efforts to disentangle entangled whales. Here's some 2024 numbers just to show you 19 entangled whales, 17 of them humpback whales in 2024 from California. Okay. All right. I'm almost out of time, I can tell already. So I'm going to plunge through and talk last but not least about our gray whales and pose the question, are they climate refugees? Now we know they are migrants, like humpback whales, typically for many, many years, right? They breed in places like San Ignacio Lagoon in Baja, Mexico, and then they migrate up along the coastline to their Arctic summer feeding grounds. However, in recent years, we've seen dramatic mortality levels and an unusual mortality event declared by NOAA in 2019. And during this period, we've seen more and more whales sticking around in our area, staying for extended times in San Francisco Bay, along our shoreline, some out to the Farallon Islands. So just a quick look here at the sort of worldwide abundance estimates. You can see there was a previous unusual mortality event in 1999 to 2000. And that time, the world population took a pretty dramatic plunge. But here's our most recent one. And you can see our numbers have dropped to, just recently to, well under half the previous record number. So the numbers are down worldwide for this species. And they appear to be down because the animals are hungry, right? Many of them are dying of starvation. And so let's talk about their feeding a little bit. So gray whales are benthic feeders. They're the only baleen whale that feeds on the seafloor. They have the shortest baleen that facilitates this. Just recently we were able to confirm benthic feeding in San Francisco Bay. They are much harder to see than humpback whales. They don't lunge around at the surface when they're feeding. They mostly feed at depth, specifically in the sea floor. We've done, again, some photo identification of these gray whales to look at them, at their movements around San Francisco Bay, out to the Farallon Islands and various other areas. Now, they don't always show us our flukes. The humpbacks tend to show us flukes. This is kind of rare fluke shots, but they usually show us their sides. So here are some examples of side-on photo ID. And so this is for an individual whale. Here I photographed it out at the Farallon Islands. It was then photographed along the coast of Pacifica, then in San Francisco Bay 3 times. Again, this is over sort of the last 5 years. We currently have 73 gray whales in the San Francisco Bay catalog, and we had large numbers this year. Last I checked, it was 32 in San Francisco Bay just this year. Um, they are also seasonal. Their peak season, though, seems to be a little bit earlier. In the spring is when we tend to see them in San Francisco Bay. And as I mentioned, more and more of them, really seem to be sticking around and not heading much further, if any further north. Um, Now, they do have a little bit different distribution, and we'll talk about that in a minute from the humpback whales. We find them further in the bay. In particular, they seem to feed a lot in the area between Angel Island, Alcatraz Island, and Treasure Island in the mud flats there. We first suspected that we were seeing feeding in 2019. We saw mud plumes and regular diving. But in 2021, we saw mud plumes repeatedly for 3 diving gray whales. And then we had first one and then several dead gray whales that could be necropsied, and we found their stomachs were full. And in fact, at this point, more than half the dead gray whales found in San Francisco Bay over the last few years, the cause of death was not starvation. The cause of death was ship strike. So here's a look at what was found in their stomachs. Um, a lot of debris, woody debris, hard plastic, soft plastic. Um, Ironically, here's a Little Mermaid Band-Aid that was found in the stomach of one, but also food as well. And we are currently working with folks at the Smithsonian Institute. We've got a paper coming out on the stomach contents of these and also comparing the stomach contents to typical infauna within the San Francisco Bay region. But it does appear that they are getting food. The next step will be to sort of assess the quality of that feeding, as it were. Here's some recent images. This is from 2023, some drone footage. And here we can see a feeding humpback whale. You see that, or sorry, feeding gray whale. You can see that mud plume running along behind where it's just been feeding. And then the other thing I want you to notice is here it's feeding, and what is right in the vicinity of that feeding behavior, that is a high-speed ferry. So most of the vessels in San Francisco Bay, sorry, I'll keep it there for a second. Most of the vessels in San Francisco Bay typically keep the speeds under at 15 knots or below. That includes the large commercial shipping vessels. However, the high-speed ferries do not. They will routinely move around at speeds of 30 knots or more. So that makes that a particular concern for them. We've also seen some really unusual feeding, and we published on this. This was in 2022 for almost an entire month, for 4 weeks. We saw very little bit from day to day, confirmed 4 to 6 gray whales feeding along the coast off Pacifica. And what was weird or unusual about this, at first we thought we were looking at humpback whales because they were lunging through the surface and fish, anchovy, were flying everywhere. Sometimes they lunge face first like this. More often than not, they swam on their sides, this kind of sharking behavior with their pectoral fins and their flukes out of the water. Now, mind you, they swim on their sides when they feed on the ocean floor too, so maybe it's an extension of that. But in all those cases, we saw fish flying. And so this is the sort of first clear evidence for fish feeding in this species of typically benthic foraging and occasionally plankton foraging gray whales. And this was also recently published in a Weber et al. Paper. All right. So it seems like we have some new foraging grounds potentially for hungry gray whales. There were also many gray whales seen in San Francisco Bay during the previous unusual mortality event. There were mortalities in San Francisco Bay, and the researchers at that time said they suspected they saw some feeding, but weren't able to confirm it. Observations over the last 8 years have confirmed increased use of San Francisco Bay during these periods of nutritional stress. And photo ID also showed prolonged residency of certain individuals and feeding observations corroborated by stomach contents. So they might seek foraging opportunities in some of these new places when feeding is limited in their typical Arctic feeding grounds. And one challenge for them is there's a high potential for interactions with vessel traffic in these areas. And they do hang out in these areas that are sort of more inshore and they're harder to see. So we saw increased numbers during this unusual mortality event, the greatest numbers in the spring, often found well inside San Francisco Bay near Angel, Alcatraz, and Treasure Islands, where they overlap with both commercial shipping lanes and fast ferry routes. So gray whales being generally less active at the surface than humpback whales makes it harder for vessel operators to spot, especially when they're foraging. I should say that the high-speed ferry operators and really everyone in the shipping community in the San Francisco Bay Area have been very keen to work with us, and we're working to build out more of a real-time warning system so that they can reroute their ferry traffic lanes around foraging gray whales. This is just showing you kind of the different areas that humpback whales in blue and the gray whales in yellow are seen in San Francisco Bay. Humpback whales most typically around the Narrows and out here into the Golden Gate Strait. That puts them primarily at risk for commercial shipping traffic in terms of ship strikes. Gray whales here further in the bay where they're going to encounter both commercial shipping and high-speed ferries. And again, just a comparison of when we see them by time of year. Basically, you can see whales any time of year now inside and around San Francisco Bay, but especially in the spring and summer. And our research efforts continue. They include photo identification catalogs, visual shore observations, communicating with the public, and collecting information from anywhere we can get it, including research partners up and down the coast, on down into your area, San Diego, and on up into Canada. We always welcome collaboration, and that's my last slide. So thank you all, and I ended on time. I can't believe it. And I'm happy to stick around for any questions you all might have.
That's awesome. I am very glad to hear that the boating community is receptive to the slowing down and watching and keeping a better eye out. We hear different things, but here in San Diego, but partly because it's the Navy and some captains don't care, some are responding really well, and so yeah, it's nice to hear that your area's got some cooperation.
Yeah, I might add just I know you have a lot of whale watching folks on the call, right?
Yeah.
And here locally, San Francisco Whale Tours has been a wonderful partner for
Good.
us. They're great around the animals. They're always very careful, and they've supported the research by often sort of allowing us to send somebody on board to collect some data, or they'll have like their guides taking photo ID images and noting locations and things like that. I imagine you have a lot of that down there.
That's awesome.
But it's a great collaboration.
Not that I'm aware of. I think, we've got a lot of naturalists on board that do a lot of photography, but I think it's more for the boat websites and stuff like that. I haven't heard of researchers being able to go out on some of those boats, but that would be nice. And I imagine that the ferries, forever, that's been their business, and their business is to get people there quickly. And when they weren't around, that was great. But now that they're coming, I bet it's a hard adjustment for them.
Yeah. And that's one thing. I mean, it's hard to ask them to just slow down. Like most of the vessel traffic, we're saying, can you just slow down? And
right.
And the point I always make to people, I don't know if it's 100% popular But, I think of this area as kind of like when you're driving your car and you go through a school zone.
Right.
You're going to slow
Right.
down because you don't want to hit any kids. It
Right.
feels to me like it should be the same kind of thing. Like personally, I do order stuff from Amazon Prime,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't be bothered getting my stuff a day later if it meant fewer whales were killed.
Right.
Just
Right.
just as a for example. I love to eat
Right.
crab, but I know the season is limited to protect whales, and I'm
Right, right. Well, and I guess that plays into the shipping, rerouting the shipping lanes too, because how do you really know where the whales are going to pop up? And so, yeah, it's constant monitoring and balance. So, yeah. Do we? We've got some comments about fantastic presentation, but um, anybody have any questions? Oh, there's one new. Let me see what it says. Just thank you and interesting presentation and thank you for rescheduling.
you're
So
welcome.
yeah, I think it was very informative and covered all facets. So I really appreciate your time and you rescheduling and talking to us about it. And it's nice, we always call the whales like the grays, the California gray whales, but they do go by Washington and Oregon, and so it's nice to share the the San Diego whales with the San Francisco whales.
I actually have a question. Tim, do you think this foraging behavior, is that enough to sustain the population? Like we've had 2 gray whales in the area this last week that the boats have seen. One looked okay, but one looked not so good. And so, yeah, it's been suggested that if they're doing this foraging behavior to try to survive, that might not work out. So, yeah, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, I guess, supposing I'm not a climate scientist, so please don't take this as my expert opinion, but supposing that there is a link between this climate change and the dramatic drop in summer sea ice in the Arctic and food availability, which I've heard tell that there is, likely to be said link. Um, what some of these animals are doing, I mean, many of them are starving, going hungry, and some of them are at least trying to find other places to find food. Um, if I put it in a bigger historical context, right, these animals, cetaceans, have been out, magnificent, um, predators, super predators that they have become in the marine environment. They have been out there, feeding and finding food successfully for a long, long time, a lot longer than there have been human beings on this planet, right? If we go sort of by the evolutionary history. They've also been through many changes in the global climate. In fact, a lot of species and population distributions we can see now for cetaceans around the world, we can map to them following, food as the climate was changing, right? And climate change seems to be sort of underlying a lot of the where we find animals if we go back historically in the record. So it seems to me that these animals are flexible, they're capable of finding new sources of food, um, and not all are going to survive, but some may. I mean, we know now that there's a sort of subset of these gray whales, the Pacific Coast Foraging Group, that for a long time has primarily stayed um, right around Puget Sound, Lower Canada, Washington, Oregon, that area. Um, and they seem to be doing all right. So this could be part of a larger shift that's going on ecologically in the species. The challenge then becomes, particularly if they're sticking around and feeding in heavily trafficked areas, um, how we can sort of look out for them and do what we can to reduce risks for them in those busy uh, urban environments. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I don't have the complete answer, of course, because that is sort of pending, right? Further analysis, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this kind of goes back to the necropsy photo where 44% was wood debris and plastic. Is that becoming more common, or is that because these whales stayed in the warmer waters longer, or in the San Francisco area longer, or hard
Well,
to say?
it's what's in the bottom of San Francisco Bay.
Right.
Now, I can tell you sort of anecdotally, and a lot of this is literally analysis in process. Um, but there are some cases now where we've had gray whales wash up outside of San Francisco Bay, and the necropsy was done, and they had full stomachs, but the infauna, the animals found in their stomachs, actually map very closely to what's found inside San Francisco Bay specifically. So these folks we're working with at the Smithsonian, they routinely study the benthic infauna, the creatures that live on the sea floor, and so they know, not only can they identify, which animals they're looking at, which honestly I can't tell. It's all a crustacean to me, but they are an invertebrate. But they also can identify. Oh, I'm pretty sure where that animal was feeding, even though it was found outside the bay. It was feeding, in this area, and a lot of the feeding, like I said, we're seeing in back of sort of Angel Island, that area, um, and like I said, they're hard to see. They disappear. If you're not patiently looking for them, you wouldn't know they're there. And so that's where we're again working, trying to get the word out, also working with the local Coast Guard, to get the word out to all vessels. Because one thing that those high-speed ferries are quite willing to do is to move around. If we can tell them, here's where there's a gray whale, they'll move around. Um, we also had the big high-speed sailing races that have been occurring in San Francisco Bay. And a couple years back, they had to stop the final heat of the high-speed sailing race. It was like $1 million prize because a gray whale was right in the raceway, and they stopped it. I mean, to their credit, they stopped it, and I can't remember who it was. Like maybe the Australians, don't quote me, were ahead, and then when they restarted it, the Spanish won or something. It was
Oh,
something like that. And so I think there were some folks that were like, "Hey,
right.
whale, it cost us $1 million, but
Right.
I'm
Well,
pleased
that's
to
awesome.
stop the
Yeah.
race." Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All righty. Um, I think no more questions, just all thank yous. Great presentation, super interesting. Definitely got new facts to use when working on the boats. So yeah, thank you very much. I really, again, appreciate your cooperation with rescheduling and for all your time and all your research. So thank you.
Thank you all for
Thank
your
you so
time,
much.
attention.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Good night.
you're welcome.